Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Megan Kumatek. Can you all hear me okay? Steve, give me a thumbs up. Great. I am the Director of Leadership and Awards with ACTE. I thank everyone for their time today, for joining us, and I'm excited to kick off our panel today on inclusion, access, equity, and diversity with our CTSO panelists and Dr. Cleveland as our moderator. But I'd like to review a few things that ACT is doing that might be of interest to everyone on here. The first is with our high quality CTE program of study framework. We would like to remind everyone that ACT has developed an evidence-based quality CTE program of study framework, which includes 12 elements designed to help CTE educators and administrators develop and improve the quality of their CTE program of study. Both access and equity and career and technical student organizations are elements included. We urge you to visit the web address listed on this page to learn more about the framework and tools ACT has developed to support the CTE field. And Steve will cut and paste the address into the chat feature right now for us. Additionally, ACT is hosting another IAED webinar next week, which will be titled, Are Your Agricultural Students Ready for Employment in the Diverse Global Workforce Economy? This webinar will be held on October 26th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And for more information on this webinar, you can visit the ACT website, which lists our webinars, and the information on Zoom will be provided to you there. Additionally, we have an IAED advisory group that members can join to advise on, that members can join to provide recommendations, expertise, and outreach to support ACT's IAED initiatives. We invite you all to join and be a part of this. More information on this program, this advisory group, and the opportunity to actually join the advisory group is also provided on our website on the IAED portion of it. Additionally, ACT has developed a new IAED mentoring program, which will launch soon to provide mentors to ACT members interested in IAED leadership roles in ACT and advising existing leaders in ACT on IAED issues. ACT is greatly increasing IAED programming at our events and in a number of other ways that I just remarked, as well as others. We have 3 equity-focused pre-conference workshops and a long list of IAED-related sessions at our upcoming virtual Vision event. We encourage everyone to attend Vision and specifically related to these sessions. Dr. Cleveland will also be hosting a number of sessions at Virtual Vision, including one, a workshop on Monday, November 30th. I believe that's from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It's on creating inclusive and equitable learning environments. And then he's also hosting a session on Friday, December 4th from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time on culturally responsive teaching in diverse classrooms. So we encourage you to attend Vision and also those events. Finally, I would like to kick off today's event and introduce Dr. Cleveland as our moderator. Dr. Cleveland has been a professor in academia for over 15 years. He served as director in the Division of Equity for the Kentucky Department of Education prior to entering higher education. He's currently the director of faculty development and diversity initiatives at Eastern Kentucky University. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland, for joining us today. I would also like to introduce our 3 panelists. Hannah Lee from FBLA. She's the FBLA National Secretary. She's from Ruston High School in Ruston, Louisiana. Welcome, Hannah. I would also like to welcome Laquid Weed, who is the first vice president at Alabama FCCLA, and he is at Talladega High School in Alabama. Lastly, I would like to introduce, welcome Laquid. Lastly, I would like to introduce Ryan Riviera, DECA's North Atlantic Region Vice President from New York, and he attends Nova Southeastern University. Welcome, Ryan. We appreciate all of you being here today, and I will hand it over to Dr. Cleveland.
All right, thank you, Megan. Before we get started, I just want to thank ACTE for this opportunity. Anytime I have an opportunity to listen to our students is really important, and not only giving voice to our students, but also this particular topic around inclusion, access, equity, and diversity. So I always want to thank ACTE for this opportunity. And so we're going to just jump right into it. We have three great representatives of the areas and students. So I always start with LaQuez, and my first question, and all of you will be able to respond to this. My first question is, why do issues of inclusion, access, equity, and diversity matter to you and in education in general?
Okay, these issues particularly affected me in my CTSO. These issues matter because there's a stereotype that cooking and the family unit is all for the woman. Like this cooking, cleaning, learning how to change diapers, learning all that is for the woman. But as for me as a man, well, as a young man, I'm not a full grown man. I have to take steps into like bringing other people into my CTSO. And then it also provides like building blocks, like diversity. With diversity, you have to break these comfortable and stagnant, like stigmatism. I don't know how to pronounce the word, but it's stigmatisms. And it causes other members to be stagnant and they don't want to improve themselves or like acquire new skills. And then inclusion ensures that no one is left behind. In our CTSO, it's easy to move up in levels. Like me, last year, my 10th grade, it was my first year in FCCLA. So you're not able to run as a state officer. But there, I bumped up, so I like progressed so quickly to where like, and they included me to where I could progress even more. And equality and equity are the steps tools to solving both of these issues.
Okay, thank you. And so you mentioned quite a bit about once getting access and then also being included to move forward in the organization. Hannah, what's your take on it? Why do issues of inclusion, access, equity, and diversity matter to you?
Mm-hmm. So I grew up in Louisiana and I still live here. And Louisiana is generally a demographically poorer state compared to the rest of the United States. So as a Louisiana state officer for FBLA, which is the Future Business Leaders of America, I encountered a lot of members who didn't have the required professional attire that we require members to have for conferences. And I distinctly remember there was one conference where one girl couldn't come to compete. It was just a 1 hour test. Like she didn't even have to show anyone. They wouldn't let her in the building. And so I sat outside while she used my shoes. And from there, I realized that there are a lot of inequities that we generally forget because we somehow grow up in a bubble of privilege that kind of blinds us away from like the smaller things that we take for granted. So for inclusion, FBLA does a really good job of offering opportunities for every demographic, whether it be socioeconomic or racial or just any diversity. We're a very inclusive organization because the future leaders of tomorrow definitely do deserve to be everyone and anyone representing every sort of person or community. For access, I know that we've been working towards more free resources, and I know with the coronavirus pandemic, there's a lot of issues with getting resources out there to members and advisors, not only just members and advisors, but for students in general, specifically students in lower socioeconomic backgrounds who don't have access to the technology needed to access those digital resources for asynchronous learning. Equality and equity weren't the same thing. And since then, I've realized that not everyone has like a one-size-fit-all policy. And so I've recognized the fact that some people need more helping than others due to the systems put in place from our nation in general and the world in general. And then diversity, as an Asian American young woman, I've recognized that diversity is really important, whether it be in the workplace or in the classroom, just because it's really hard to feel encouraged if no one you know looks like you, or you don't see any trailblazers who look like you as well. Just all of those issues are extremely important to promote the general welfare of like the next generation of future leaders.
So you had a personal experience where someone's social and economic status could have been a barrier to participating in the organization and things of that nature. And you learned the difference between equality and equity in 5th grade. Well, you're way ahead of me, so I didn't learn it that early. So, Ryan, what are your thoughts on why the issues of inclusion, equity, and access and diversity matter?
The issues of inclusion, access, equity, and diversity are so important because each one can represent a different aspect of our society as a whole. So I want to touch more on access and equity with my own personal experiences and seeing how the inequality and the lack of access has actually impacted the education of students in my area. Where my school district that I attended for the past 10 years, I went through elementary school, middle school, and high school in my district. We have a 95% graduation rate. And when you break down our demographics, there's 19% of us are Hispanic, 4% are Black, and then the majority is white. And if you take a look at the economic status of my school district, about 16% are economically disadvantaged. Whereas you go 2 miles down the road, crossing the school district line, you have the East Ramapo School District, which is right next to mine, where they only have a 65% graduation rate. They are 30% Black, 60% Hispanic, and 87% economically disadvantaged. And we had even reached out my chapter to them, asking them if they were interested in starting a DECA chapter. And this was when I was also a state officer. And they had told us that they had tried it in the past before, but it was the fact that their students could not afford to be a part of our organization and were not able to get that funding that limited their access to these opportunities in the future. When it comes to diversity, very similar to Hannah, being a Latino is something that I at first wasn't proud of as I grew up because I had seen the different issues with racism and the different prejudices within society. But as I grew up, I realized that even if it's the smallest position, it's more representation in a workplace. It's more representation in an organization. And that's what I would have needed when I was younger, was to see someone who was like me, to hear someone speak Spanish, to see that representation to inspire me. And I want to be that same voice. And when it comes to inclusion, DECA has been working so incredibly hard and has introduced different elements to the future so that we can be a more inclusive and a more diverse and have that equity within our organization. So we do have an equity, diversity, and inclusion task force. And with our Marriott Foundation partnership, we have created this partnership to remove the barriers to different hospitality training tools so that not only are our students going to be able to access this, but we're going to be able to remove those barriers that would have prevented certain students from accessing them in the past.
All right, great. Thank you. I appreciate all y'all's responses. I think this next question is really important because a lot of times we rarely ask students their thoughts about what should take place in the classroom. So I'm going to start with Hannah with this question. What is the most important issue that CTE educators can do to create accessible and equitable learning environments?
So like I said in the question prior, the one-size-fit-all mindset is very detrimental to youth these days because there was a stat from, I think it was the CTSO website that says 80% of students who are learning in today's education system do not learn in the way that our education system is balanced. And you have to understand that for CTSO organizations and CTE educators, these career and technical programs are extremely important for students who don't necessarily fit that academic straight A pathway to college, or for students who find that skills needed outside the school environment are more important to their future paths than taking a test and filling in bubbles. And it's essentially a huge problem for CTSO organizations and CTE educators as a whole to forget about that the equity aspect of our organizations. And so if we were to include, I know the FBLA does, I don't know if the other CTSOs do, include stimulus packages, include more equitable opportunities, webinars for members and advisors to speak up about the issues that are facing them so that we can do something about it on the national level, just every way possible to make a clear, transparent path of communication for everyone in the organization.
Okay, thank you. Ryan, what do you think is the most important issue that CTE educators can do to create accessible and equitable learning environments?
I would have to 100% agree with Hannah in the sense that the one size fits all does not work for everyone, and it can cause so many students to struggle. And I know that as a college student, that's one of my biggest struggles, is that growing up with a Common Core curriculum, we all had learned the same way. And for some of us, it just does not work out. And I know that that was one of my biggest weaknesses when I was in high school, and it still is one of my weaknesses now because of the fact that even though I'm now a college student, that same style of learning is still applied, and it's something that I'm not truly learning. And if I do not feel invested, or if I don't feel that I'm learning, it makes it a lot more difficult for me to even understand material. And I think that's something that as a whole, CTE educators can definitely work on and create their own style of learning tailored to their students, so that their students are truly learning these skills and learning the material that they need for their futures. And with Hannah, I know Hannah, you had mentioned that the FBLA is conducting different webinars and is working so that their students can feel that their voices are heard and so that their membership is being heard. And at DECA, we are doing the exact same thing. And that is what the role of our executive officers is that we reach out to our membership base, and for each of us who represent a different region, that's the region that we connect with. And we listen to them and say, you know, what do you want to see from us? What can we do to make this a better experience for you, a better organization for you? And that's something that DECA has been doing right from the get-go. And that's something that I appreciate, especially as a minority in this organization. And knowing that if I do have a discrepancy, if I do have an issue, there's somebody who's going to listen and do something about it.
Okay, thank you. LaQuez, what is your take on what are some things that CTE educators can do to create accessible and equitable learning environments?
Right along with Ryan and Hannah, we pretty much have like all the exact same ideas in the response, because FCCLA just launched, I think it's just last week, we just launched this webinar with Franklin Covey called Reality Talks. And it's basically like where members can chime in and give us their response on literally everything, on how their learning path is going with the coronavirus, how they're learning, like what can we do to help them be better, basically, be better in all aspects, not just FCCLA, within their personal lives. So it's basically the same thing as Ryan and Hannah with FCCLA.
Okay, so some of the things I heard you all say is that all our students do not learn the exact same way. We may need to differentiate our instruction, and all that falls under the umbrella of instructional equity. So that's some of the things that I've kind of heard you all say. Ryan, there are many different voices represented in CTE and CTSOs. How do we provide a platform for various perspectives in a way that is both inclusive, respective of different opinions?
I think that in order to make sure that we have a platform that includes those different opinions and is respectful of those different opinions, first starts at the educational aspect of it and making sure that we're truly telling our students and telling the membership that there are going to be people who don't agree with you. Even if you grew up in an area or you had gone through society where everyone had agreed with you, there are going to be people with varying opinions. And starting with the education and telling them, you know, you have to be respectful because of the fact that not everybody's going to agree with you. And that's just how life is going to be. I think that's the first step. But also when we're talking about being respectful of different opinions and being inclusive, there's the idea that with a lot of different workplaces, when it comes to education in general, the token minority or the token minorities and that group, and understanding that it's really disrespectful when we recognize that we are that token minority and we are simply there for diversity purposes, and trying to be more genuine about the efforts that we are doing with those platforms, with those different outlets that we're using to educate those members, and making sure that those who feel like they're the token minority understand that they're not, and that they do serve a true purpose in education and in informing membership.
All right, great, great. LaQuez, you know, what are your thoughts on how do we provide voice and choice and ensure that everyone's voice has been heard? What kind of platforms can we create to make sure that happens?
So with Alabama FCCLA, this is not national FCCLA, this is the state level. We've formed something called an inclusion council, and this is the first year that it's ever been formed. It's called an inclusion council. So it's basically 8 to 12 members from each chapter, and they meet virtually now, but it was supposed to be in person. They meet virtually, and they meet to discuss needs based upon like where they are. Like we have one place called New Site, and it's very secluded. no 5G Wi-Fi. It's very secluded. So they'll come and they'll address their issues upon each other, and they'll report back to us what do they need and what can we do to conform to them and make an easy pathway for them. So I think if this idea could be like passed upon all the other CTSOs or classrooms, period, that it will be like an amazing breakthrough for inclusion and equity.
Okay, thank you. So Hannah, once again, there are many different voices represented in CTE and CTSOs. How do we provide a platform for various perspectives in a way that is both inclusive and respectful from different opinions? Your thoughts?
I have to agree with Ryan and Lopez, just because intellectual diversity and just understanding that other people have different perspectives is extremely important. And I do agree with Ryan when it does start at the educational level. If we can get our CTE organizations and our educators to tell our members and our students that not everyone's going to agree with them, not everyone's going to view them the same way due to the prejudices in our society. And like, while we can work to fix those, we have to understand that not everything's going to come overnight. And so just a gradual progression in transparency. I know that FBLA does these intellectual diversity roundtables where we open up the floor to all our members, just like FCCLA does, just like I'm pretty sure DECA does with their one call DECAs, just so that we can hear everyone's opinions, whether they be really, I guess, negative towards the national organization or positive towards the national organization. Just opening that transparent path of communication for intellectual diversity, for difference in opinions. I really feel like that's the best way to both be inclusive, be respectful, and also promote a change that wasn't there before.
Great, great. So I kind of heard you and Ryan saying that facilitating these conversations, ensuring voices that you allow a little grace, civility, and some accountability, right? Okay. LaQuez, this is a two-part question. Let me just give you all the first part. What type of support do teachers and advisors need related to inclusion, access, equity, and diversity?
Okay, so on our FCCLA website, we have this survey that we're waiting for our advisors to chime in on that. So as soon as I get that data back from that, I will be able to give you an answer. But due to the pandemic, I can't give you an answer on there right now. Okay,
so LaQuez said he needs some data-informed information before he jumps out there. I got you. Hannah, what's your thoughts? What type of support do teachers and advisors? We know classroom teaching is really a tough job and honorable job, but what type of support do teachers and advisors need related to inclusion, access, equity, and diversity?
So like the same thing that I said for the last answer, they really, we all really need to understand that inclusion and diversity and just that aspect of our communities, that type of change cannot happen overnight, and patience is extremely important for the heads of our organizations, for people like you to talk to teachers on a more personal level and address their concerns about how maybe something isn't working out the way that they want it to, maybe like some problem is happening with their students who don't seem to understand that diversity is something that's extremely important to a lot of people. It's very much about that open communication, very much about that transparency and that reassurance that they're on the right path, and developing resources or advisor and teacher seminars for them to understand how to better address these issues, maybe with professionals or people who have overcome the same things would be very beneficial.
Okay. Ryan, what type of support do you think teachers need and advisors need to address inclusion, access, equity, and diversity?
One of my favorite sayings is that you are never too old to learn. So pretty much with my last answer to the previous question, where we have to focus on the educational aspect of it, the same thing would be applied to teachers and advisors, and educating them on what exactly does inclusivity, access, equity, and diversity mean, and how can they take a look at their educational setting and recognize the issues that they find in their setting and work to a solution to solve those problems. And being able to support teachers with the access to that education would be the first step. And while you're doing that, you're also tackling the A of IAED, which is access, and making sure that teachers are getting the access to that education that they need and understanding what these issues truly are, and reflecting the change that they want to see, starting with their educational spaces.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about that for a second. Do you all think, I want to just start with Hannah, do you think that it's important that teachers receive professional development and professional opportunities to address issues around equity and access in the classroom?
Okay, yeah, I know that in Louisiana specifically, we've been working towards a lot more inclusion, I guess, educational seminars for our educators. And so if some sort of thing can be implemented across the nation, I know that a lot of states already put inclusion, IAED issues on the forefront of their agendas just because it's such a critical moment in our society to understand those things on a deeper and more personal level. I guess relating back to my last question, you really need to reassure them, to educate them. And like Ryan said, it's never too late to learn around that sort.
Okay, Ryan, Laquez, either one of you want to build on that around professional development, professional learning around equity and access and support for teachers?
So really big on my last answer about education. So I think that the professional development 100% ties into that. And professional development is something that teachers have to go throughout their entire educational career within their school districts. And I know that's something that we even had certain days off as students because of the fact that the staff had professional development days. So I think that by implementing these IAED issues and showing the recognition of these issues within their own school communities and making educators and administration of those buildings sit down and recognize the issues that are in their community, that's the first step in recognizing your privilege and moving forward to try to solve those issues.
Okay, so Hannah and both Ryan have mentioned privilege. What do you mean by that? And Laquez, you can chime in also if you like. What do you mean by privilege?
I can go first, just because I went first on the question already. Privilege is somewhat, in a sense, I know that while the Black Lives Matter movement went a really big force over the summer, a lot of people made graphics, and I swiped through a few, in addition to signing petitions and all the other things that we really need to do for our society. Someone made a graphic, one of my friends made a graphic of the definition of privilege, and it's essentially the understanding that, or the not understanding that the societal pressures around us today don't affect you. So if you are a person who has never felt some sort of obstacle in your path that relates to something that you cannot help yourself, that is essentially a sense of privilege. It can be an academic privilege, it could be a racial privilege, it can be an economic privilege, just anything that gives you an advantage over someone who cannot help what they have already.
Okay, Ryan, your take?
So I have to 100% agree with Hannah's answer, and just touching a bit more with my own personal community, those statistics that I'd given you at the beginning, showing that right there when we're talking about the access to education and the quality of education, the privilege that I had when I was going through the school system is that I didn't live 2 miles down the road, a different school district. And not many other students have that opportunity where they can attend a blue ribbon high school or they can attend a well-funded school district. Whereas with this neighboring school district, each and every single year, they're losing more and more funding and more of their schools are beginning to close. And showing not only educators, but also students that you have some sort of privilege in society, whether you realize it or not. And that is simply because of whether it be where you were born, the color of skin you were born, the language you spoke when you were born, and as you grew up, showing that your privilege will impact your education and it will impact your ability to teach as well when we start to talk about educators, and discussing it as, you have an advantage. Recognize that advantage, use that advantage to help others.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about the organizations in particular. I'm not sure if Laquez is still there or not, but we're, and you all can field this question first. Are there ways or strategies to promote CTE programs and CTSOs in a way that will cultivate more diversity in our classrooms and organizations? In other words, how can we increase the diversity in our programs and also in the classrooms? And Ryan, you want to take that one first?
Sure. All right. So to cultivate this diversity, you have to take a look at the demographics of exactly where you are and recognize where you're pretty much lacking in those areas and where that diversity is lacking. So taking a look and seeing, why don't we have programs in certain areas? Is there a certain concentration of people from this socioeconomic status, this race, those who speak this language? And how can we make sure that our organization is reaching them and being accessible to them? And going along those lines of making sure that our organizations do not become somewhere where you cannot see a voice like you, where you cannot see someone who looks like you and view them as a role model or view them as someone that can aid you in your future. And by doing that, we're going to be able to increase the diversity across all CTSOs because of the fact that now we're not limiting the education simply to where it's currently existing and where it has been pre-existing, but by branching out to those areas where that education is not available or where our programs are not currently in, we're going to be able to increase our diversity, not only along the lines of race and ethnicity, but also around socioeconomic status as well, and cause a change for our future organizations.
Okay, thank you. LaQuez is having a little technical difficulties right now. We'll bring him back in a second. Hannah, what are some strategies you think, and build on Ryan's response, to promote CTE programs and CTSOs, and how we can increase more diversity in those organizations and programs?
I have to 100% agree with Ryan. It was a beautiful answer, and FBLA is doing the exact same thing. I know that our Illinois branch is working with the Chicago Public School District, which is one of the largest school districts in the nation, to address all of those inequities in the little suburban pockets of the city that don't necessarily have the economic, racial, or any other privilege that we see in our other chapters. I know that on the forefront, whenever we market the organization, our CTSOs, to schools that may not have the economic funds, we have to remove the stereotype that these business organizations or these family and consumer science organizations, these all our CTSOs, there's this stereotype that I guess a lot of people have mentioned to me before. The people think that the CTSO members are overachievers. They think that they're people who are going to change the world. And yes, we are, but that doesn't mean that we have to create barriers for other people to have the resources that we have to help impact the world. And I know that for FBLA at my school, I've heard a lot of students say that they don't feel smart enough. They don't feel as if they can handle being a future business leader, just because they don't think that they're capable of that ability. And just removing that sort of stereotype whenever we branch out to the or school districts or these members who I guess feel as if no one else is representing them on an organizational or a school-wide or educational national level. It's really about the way you show people an opportunity instead of creating some sort of prestige around it. It has to be an inclusive atmosphere and an inclusive marketing technique.
Okay, Hannah, you said something I found kind of interesting, that some of the students may have these perceptions that they can't participate or they'll feel like they're at the par. Where do you think these perceptions and stereotypes, how are they cultivated? Where do you think they come from?
So I guess FBLAs comes from the name. I guess whenever you think of future business leaders, you think of people like Steve Jobs, like Jeff Bezos. You think of like all these multimillionaires, these billionaire people. And I guess I go to a pretty poor school. I'm in the newer part of the building though, so like regardless of the environment, it's a generally poor school in a poorer district, and I know that a lot of our members face these economic hardships, and not only that, but throughout their lives they've been underneath this mindset that they don't deserve to succeed in life. Like they're stuck in this cycle that they're in. This sort of stereotype around the CTSOs comes from, I guess, our success in the nation, or success in the world. And I guess it's very intimidating to potential members and potential students because they feel like They see all these people dressed up in business attire and they're like, oh, number one, I don't own that. Number two, I can't afford to go to like insert Anaheim or insert wherever the national conference is. Like I don't have the funds, I don't have what it takes, I don't have the intelligence to compete. Like they feel as if they're inadequate. And that sort of mindset is very detrimental because we want our CTSOs to be very inclusive. We want them to present opportunities for everyone. And for some reason, while we've been working on those, there is still the stereotype that we don't. And so I guess throughout the years, we'll gradually work towards that goal.
Okay, thank you. So Ryan, I want you all to take an opportunity to talk about what are you all doing kind of locally and in the state, your CTOs, and what are some activities you all are doing to implement issues, activities around inclusion, access, equity, and diversity. What are some things that you all are doing at your organization or at the state level?
I will answer that one first. So across the school, state, and national level, school and state are going to be past tense for me and what we had already been doing in the past to make sure that we are specifically working on access to our organization. So within my high school, what we had done was, because of the fact that I was a regional officer, state officer, and now I serve as one of the international vice presidents for DECA. So I've seen the same issues across all 4 levels, in that the access to DECA in itself is a limiting factor. And very similar to what Hannah had said before, regarding the fact that some people do not simply have enough money to attend certain conferences, and that's what stops them from joining the organization. So on the school and state level, we had implemented a scholarship program where for our school, it was we selected a certain amount of members, and our chapter would actually cover their costs, and we would all just split the cost amongst the members, and that would pretty much what we would do so that we can make sure we have as many students come as possible. For the regional and for the state level, what we had done was that we implemented a scholarship program where within our region, we picked 1 member, and across the state, we had picked 3 members per region, and they had received scholarships in order to attend our conferences so that they weren't in a limiting environment and they didn't feel that they could attend these conferences because they couldn't afford it. And that was one of the hardest things that I had to do as a chapter officer, was discuss costs with membership. And, you know, young freshmen who were so excited to head to the international level to go compete in Anaheim or to go compete in Orlando, Atlanta. And, you know, we would break down the cost of them and they would go, oh, I can't, like, I physically cannot afford that. And they would place first in the state level and, you know, based off of their work, could have done incredibly well on the international level. But because of the fact that they didn't have the money and they didn't have the access to that money, they were limited and they lost out on another educational opportunity. So that was just more on a personal level, what had been done in my area. On the international level for DECA as a whole, there are pretty much 3 activities that we're currently focused on. And these activities are meant to address the issues of IAED, so inclusivity, access, equity, and diversity. So something new that we have started this year was with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force. So this is a task force that falls under our board of directors, and they review what our current practices are as an organization and address the issues that maybe have been overlooked in the past and work to find solutions to make us a more diverse and inclusive organization, as well as the workplace as a whole. Something that we have done for the past few years was the AT&T project, which is where we work with AT&T to provide membership and career development so that students who do not have this within their own localized environments can get it from one of our partners. And then with our Marriott Foundation partnership, this works on tackling the issues of the access to training and education, specifically under the Department of Hospitality.
All right, so you have a lot of good partnerships also, Ryan. That's great. We have LaQuez back, great. And so I'm gonna let you jump in right here. LaQuez, what are some activities that your CTSO organization is actually implementing to address inclusion, access, equity, and diversity? You may be on mute, LaQuez. Okay, we can't. We'll see if we can work that out, and then I'll go to Hannah, and then we'll come back to LaQuez. Okay.
I really like Ryan's format, so I'll probably steal it. I'll go first through my local level and the state level and then the national level of what FBLA is doing. So as I stated earlier, I do go to a poor school, and my advisor and I, since the get-go, he's tried to create these fundraising opportunities for our members. We've reached out to small businesses, and we've had, I think, 50 members one year who could not afford to go to even the state conference, and that's only about $50. And generally, we don't think that $50 is like that much to go to like a 3-day conference, but for these members, that was them scraping the bottom of their parents' wallets to even find money to go to a conference like that. And so what we did was we had this box of general donations, and they were completely anonymous. They could be from members who had the economic privilege to share some of their funds, or these fundraisers, or where we could donate the money that we raised from our fundraiser to direct students. We created these pathways for them on a more equitable term, and they were given out as scholarships based off of a form that these members filled out about what they've done, their dedication to the chapter. We've tried to do everything possible. And since then, our chapter, we implemented this sophomore year. And so now I'm a senior, and we went from bringing 20 people from our local chapter to the state level, and now we have over 20 state champions from the previous year. So all those members who couldn't compete due to economic barriers competed and placed first on the state level, and it was incredibly rewarding to see that. On the state level, I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the webinar about the uniform problem, and just like the professional attire issue. Just because professional attire, a blazer, a skirt, heels are extremely expensive, especially for girls. And I know that guys, I guess suits cost quite a lot of money as well, or suits and shoes, because we require a certain type of dress in order to compete. And so after realizing that that was a huge issue last year as a state officer, this year we're starting a uniform closet for all of our chapters across the state. So if a member does not have the attire necessary, they can definitely reach out to the state, and we will find a uniform for them and then send it down. In the same way, on the national level, last year the National Uniform Challenge for FBLA was started, and that's through grassroots fundraising and fundraising from like just general members who gave money and donations, and the national level compiled all of those and created these scholarships. There's one uniform given to every level for every state. So that's 50 states and 3 uniforms per state, because we have 3 levels: the middle level, the high school division, and the collegiate level. And so we were able to give free uniforms out to those members as well. On resources, I'm leading the development of a free digital resource library for all of our members. So we've been working with Facebook for social media internships, and Intuit and KPMG and CVS Health. We have partnerships just like DECA and FCCLA, I'm sure, just to create these opportunities, create these digital webinars for our members to learn more. And those are saved and can be accessed on any device for members to learn more about not just FBLA, but career opportunities and pathways that they can go to. So FBLA's done quite a good job with cultivating diversity, cultivating just every inclusional aspect of our organization, but we're definitely looking towards creating more opportunities for our members.
Right. A lot of great work. Thank you, Hannah. LaQuez, we'll test you out real quick. There he is. All right. We're going to give you an opportunity to brag like Ryan and Hannah. They've done a lot of great work. What are some activities you all are doing in your CTSO down in Alabama that's addressing and implementing inclusion, access, equity, and diversity? What are some activities you all are doing in your CTSO?
Okay, so the same thing Miss Sandy said in the chat, I don't know if you guys can see that. She said that we offer free like attendance to our conferences in the local cities that we have our conferences at. So here in Alabama, we host our conference at the Montgomery Renaissance Hotel. So therefore, we do like room blocks, and we offer like discounts for the people. You have to fill out an application for the discount. So we offer like low attendance rates for the people who aren't able to afford. And then we also do this thing called Red Jacket, My Red Jacket, Your Red Jacket. So basically we have like FCCLA alumni who are willing to donate their jackets to our people who who aren't able, because our jackets are almost $75 in our FCCLA store. So it's basically like you would donate your jacket to someone who doesn't have a jacket. So that way people who can afford our uniform, basically like Hannah said, it's the same thing as that, except for, you know, basically how I explained earlier.
Okay. Well, it sounds like some of the things you all are doing I mean, they're really great. And the common theme that I heard from all three of you all is about removing barriers and access. And I'm in higher education, so I probably don't need some of those resources from you all. We don't make a lot of money in higher ed. But so I want to get to this question as we finish up. And I want to get this, I'm going to skip to this last question, and I want each of you all to really think about it. And I'm going to start with Hannah. Have you ever been personally impacted by exclusionary practices in schools or another educational environment?
Yeah, so the Asian community is generally perceived as the model minority based off of just the academic successes and experiences that we have in comparison to the African American and the Black community and the Latino community and all the other demographics. And so throughout my life, I know especially in my elementary school, I went to a predominantly white elementary school. It was a pretty privileged little group of children. And no one looked like me. Everyone assumed that I was good at school off the bat. It was very hard for me to stay up with that stereotype, and I know that the Asian community is by far like the least impacted by the prejudices in our society. But due to the coronavirus this past year, I've dealt with some pretty nasty complaints and I guess very harsh complaints telling me to like go back to my country, just like this general prejudice that seemed to be hidden a few years ago seemed to pop up out of nowhere. And so that really showed me that no one who's really a minority is ever safe, quote unquote, from the racial prejudices in our society. But generally, exclusionary practices are not very much implemented with the Asian American community just because, again, the model minority myth. But I have friends and I know people who were impacted vastly from just the way the teachers perceived them and the stereotypes that were placed on them and the way that they were viewed at school just because of the color of their skin or where they were born or what language or dialect or accent that they had that truly did hinder their educational endeavors.
Okay, thank you for sharing, and sorry you had to experience the insults and comments recently. LaQuez, have you been personally impacted by exclusionary practices in school or other educational environments?
Yes, sir. Just as Hannah said, I went to a predominantly Caucasian elementary school. It was on the opposite side of the town where we call it a mill town. So basically where no one my color lived there. I was the only African American in my kindergarten, first grade, second, third, and fourth grade class. So all of those years, when we would do reading groups, I never understood why I would have to read by myself. I've never been a bad kid. I'm an excellent reader. I'm an A honor roll student. I never understood why I would have to read off by myself. So as I grew older and like, as many people see in the news, I mean, it's very prevalent. As many people see in the news, Black Lives Matter and all of these, it's just a lot of stuff going on. Now that I can see that and now that I observe that, I see that I was a victim to being excluded. And I never understood why I was excluded because of the color of my skin and none of that. And then in the sixth grade, and I'm trying to get too emotional. In the sixth grade, me and this girl, she's a Caucasian girl, her name is Emily. We competed ever since kindergarten for the top awards. If I was number one, she was number one. If I was number two, she was number two. So all the way up until the sixth grade came, my sixth grade graduation. And I kept every single one of my report cards. And my mom told me to keep every single one of my report cards just in case something happened. And I never understood what she was saying because I thought the report card was just a useless piece of paper. So I kept every report card. And towards the end of the year, she told me to take them to the school. So we went to our graduation ceremony, and I never understood why she told me to keep those report cards in my backpack. And when we got there and we called out the top 10 awards, I was the only one sitting there with no awards. And she asked me, do you understand why I asked you to keep your report cards? I said, no, ma'am. And she was like, let's go talk to the principal. We went to talk to the principal, and they told me, why are you here? You didn't earn any awards. You could have stayed home. And I put out my report cards, and it showed all of the straight A's that I had, and it showed my class rank. I was #1. But they gave it to the opposite. They gave it to the girl named Emily because of the color of her skin. And I was withdrawn from that school because of that. And that was one of my personal experiences.
Let me ask you this, LaQuez. What did you learn from that experience?
Like my grandmama always said, there's wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't know how she worded it, but it's something like that. And she was like, there's wolves in sheep's clothing. So sometimes you'll have to read between the lines a lot and understand like where you are and just be aware. So I learned to be aware and to always be assertive and read between the lines, basically.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being transparent also. Ryan, tell me about your experiences. If you experience, personally experience any kind of exclusionary practices through your experience in school. You can talk about K-12 or you can talk about even college.
So with Hannah and LaQuez, I also went to a predominantly school and high school. So specifically when it came to elementary school, I had grown up speaking Spanish, so English is not my first language. And when I had moved to the suburbs where I live now, I had spoken English because I had attended school for a few years, but I still just didn't have the pronunciations down. I still had issues with my speech, and I just felt more comfortable speaking Spanish. And in my elementary school, there were 3 of us who spoke Spanish, and all 3 of us just so happened to be in the same grade. Originally, the 3 of us were in the same 3rd grade class. And once they had learned that the 3 of us all spoke Spanish and predominantly spoke Spanish, they had actually separated us and put 1 in each 3rd grade class. And we all had to go to different speech therapies and different speech practices so that we can work on our English, which I understand is a great portion of our education. But for the remainder of our elementary school career, the 3 of us would never end up in the same classroom because of the fact that they wanted to limit the amount that we were speaking Spanish, basically. And this even reflected upon myself where I started to reject my own culture because I viewed speaking Spanish from that experience to be something negative. And I completely stopped speaking Spanish at one point, to the point where I had actually forgotten how to speak some Spanish and I had to reteach myself Spanish with my family. So that was one experience that I had. And when it came to my middle school and high school, when they were teaching secondary languages, I had originally thought about taking Spanish because of the fact that I knew I had forgotten so much of it, and I knew that I wanted to learn more and just really broaden my horizons, even though it was my first language. And I was not allowed to take Spanish because of the fact that it was listed on my record as my first language. And I had asked them, I said, you know, this is like, it's a language. Why am I not allowed to take it? They're like, well, it's on your record that you're listed as Hispanic and Latino, and it's on your record that you speak Spanish and English. So we don't think it's fair for you to take Spanish. And I looked at them and I was like, well, I grew up, I'm from a Caribbean family. That's not the same kind of culture as they would have in Mexico or Argentina or Spain. It's completely different cultures. It's something that I want to learn. I want to expand my horizons. And they pretty much still said no. So I ended up having to take a different language. And I just also want to touch on this really quickly. Hannah, I'm so sorry that happened to you with everything that's going on. When you had mentioned it, the first thing that I had thought of was what happened actually at my job. And this is the reason why I left my most recent job was with the Black Lives Matter movement. I had people come into my job because they were very upset over a face mask that I was wearing, which supported the movement. And I had been told to go back to whatever country I came from. I had people threatening to call ICE on me. I was told that my life didn't matter. So I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's not something that anybody should have to go through, let alone any student who is below the age of 18, because of the fact that we are so young and we're going through life at such a young age that these are issues my grandparents had fought to correct, and yet it's still things that we're going through now. So I just wanted to touch on that really quick, Hannah, and say that I'm really sorry you had to go through that.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I want to thank all of you all, and I'll just encourage you all to speak your truth and continue to tell your stories, because it actually motivates other younger people that experience some of the same things. And we're going through a lot these days, right? And I liken that we all everybody on this Zoom, everybody in this community, in this society are going through this storm. And the storm is made up of coronavirus, is made up of social injustices, it is made up of economic strain. And that's the storm. And we're all going through the storm differently. I may be going through the storm in an ocean liner. So I feel it, but I may not feel it that much. Steven may be going through this storm in a yacht. Megan may be going through the storm in a traditional boat. LaQuez may be going through the storm in a lifeboat. And Hannah may be going through the storm on a life preserver. We're all situated differently and going through the storm, and you cannot use universal strategies and activities to meet the needs of everyone going through the storm. So I just want to thank you all. I want to thank Megan and Steven for this opportunity, and I'll let Megan take over from here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland, and to our 3 panelists. You all were wonderful and so dynamic, and we really appreciate all your personal shares today. And as a reminder, this will be posted on our website for everyone to see. And I just wanted to mention, sorry, I'm sharing my screen real quick. I just wanted to mention one other IAED item is that we have launched a column in our Techniques magazine, which goes to all of our members. So all of these IAED items that ACT is working on are available on our website, and they are important. I hope everyone will check out our webinar I mentioned next week on these important issues, especially right now, as Dr. Cleveland mentioned. So thanks everyone for your time today. Does anyone have any questions that we'd like to pose? I believe some people were mentioning things in the chat, but if anybody has anything else to add, now is the time. If not, we will go ahead and close today. We thank everyone for their participation. Thank you, for Dr. Cleveland, and to Ryan, Hannah, and LaQuez. We appreciate you all.
All right, thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.